Communist North Koreans and the Chinese did not heed the Red Cross or the Geneva Convention. Those taken prisoner in Korea received inadequate food, clothing and shelter. Joe Lavery almost lost his sight from malnutrition. He was forced to eat anything he could find in order to survive.
I could feel losing my eyesight and things like that. When we were in this bean camp, people that were out and were pulling anything green at all, I would be lifting this and eating it, and somebody else say, that's poison, this is all right. And then the diet started to improve a wee bit, and I was lucky enough, but there was some people who lost their sight.
Joe was also suffering the after effects of double pneumonia.
Chinese put me through an operation, which was supposed to be the greatest cure, is what the Chinese were giving you, but they also started to give us beef and, a beef stew, as much as you could eat of it. I think that worked better than the operation on the side. And I pulled through it. An awful lot didn't, but then when I get down along with my own mates and soldier comrades, it was just a matter of waiting it out and putting up with it.
Camaraderie forged on the battlefields extended to the prisoner of war camps. No matter where they came from or what their beliefs were, the prisoners were treated the same, but their chances of survival could fall or rise depending on the will of their captors.
North Koreans were very, very cruel people. They seemed to delight in cruelty. And the Chinese believed their ultimate aim was not to kill you or anything like that. They wanted you to turn you to their belief, which is what they had done with masses and masses of their own people successfully in China.
Communist ideologies were forced upon the captives. Interviewed in 1963, Bishop Quinlan recalls how the North Korean communists attempted to turn his beliefs.
My lord, did the communists try any indoctrination of you when they had you in camp there?
They did, yes. They tried it for 2 weeks. The tiger took us in hand, all the missionaries and the other civilians. He gave us a talk every day for 1 hour, standing in the very, very cold, about 40 degrees of frost. You're standing out in the open yard, listening to the tiger expatiating on communism. We weren't impressed. After 2 weeks, he gave us an oral examination. And of all people, he picked on me for the first one. Well, I let him have it. He asked me what did I think of communism. I said, I don't think much of it, never will believe in it. But if you want to believe in it, I'll respect your views, and you please respect mine. And that was the end of the brainwashing for us, but they did work long and hard on the American officers and men.
Communist indoctrination methods had little effect on Irish prisoners of war like Mairtin MacDonncha.
We daarna blian diskuteert skool. Weer kies of communism, agus communism loop, Moscow's Chinese geloof near a kind of belief we ain't.
They were always having lectures, but we weren't going to change our turn for anything like that there. Then we started getting the Daily Worker and all those sorts of things handed around to them. That was all right till started making smokes out of it and getting punished for it. Tearing up the paper. You destroy the people's property.
As news of atrocities filtered back to Ireland, families at home, waiting for word of Irish priests missing in action, knew little of their fate. They could only wait and pray.
For the families back in Ireland, it really was a traumatic time for them, because basically they had no news. The Columbans got very, very little news, and we didn't know what their fate was.
In July 1953, peace talks which had been negotiated for so long were about to reach a conclusion.
Well, what brought our release about was the death of Stalin, actually. And we were the first out, the British party. I was thrown in as a tilly, you know. Then about 2 weeks later came the French civilians, and then the Americans.
As the war wound down, the prisoners got word they were going home.
I got down on my knees and thank God, just cried. some sheep. I beg your pardon. You couldn't explain the relief. But thank goodness I got it.
The war was over, and the prisoners of war were to return home to Ireland. Bishop Quinlan, who had been captured preparing for Mass, was about to say his first Mass in 3 years, in a most unusual location.
What was your route from North Korea home?
We went by rail across Manchuria to Moscow. When I got to Moscow, little Father Bissonnet of the American Embassy was out there, and he asked me, would you like to say Mass? I said, I sure would. So I went to his little chapel, and I said my first Mass in 2 years and 10 months there. It all seemed like a first Mass again, you know, first after ordination. I'm sure old Stalin turned in his grave if he could see me from where he was. Didn't know whether he could or not.
Called the river of no return.
Bishop Quinlan returned home to Ireland a national hero, but he would not remain in Ireland for very long.
His whole ambition was to get back to Korea, and that's what he did. After a recuperating period in Ireland, and when the welcomes were over, he was back again in Korea. And he died in Korea too, and is buried out there in the diocese that he once ruled in Chuncheon.
To be lost in the storm.
The boys are back. In a twinkling, the months of captivity are swept away in the breathless joy of reunion. Safe again, British soldiers who shared with the other allies the privation, hardships, suffering, and frustration of Korea.
Joe Lavery arrived back in Southampton to have a brief reunion with his young bride, who he hadn't seen in 3 years.
The boat came in and my wife was there waiting for me. And then I went straight into hospital. And it was what they call the nutcase hospital. It was Natalie Hospital, where they put all the people who were a bit bomb happy and that. But I finally got back to Northern Ireland. People in my own street, my mother, and grabbed my mother first of all, and the local councillor, whatever he was, came up and welcomed me home and all the rest of it. And they gave me a wallet, which I still have to this day, presented to me by the people of Dewey Street, and £17 in it. And I treasure that wallet. Don't usually, just treasure it. I thought that was very nice of them.
Mairtin MacDonncha initially went back to America before returning to Ireland for good.
Will any regrets that?
No. Oh, no. Tita Robert Congan looking to look me. What much the Argentine was that I was even saw the Margus financially is Columban now how much there. We have to get them with we full health him. Sludgy was said. I was upon a whole regret times.
The Irishmen who fought with the American and British Commonwealth forces and the Irish missionary priests endured chronic deprivation as POWs during the Korean War. They suffered in the fight against the great enemy of the time, communism.
Just the same as you could say you're proud of the military men. I mean, they were giving their lives for their country. Well, I mean, a missionary gives his life for the people that he's working with. Basically, you're giving your life for God. You don't desert your flock when the going gets tough. You stay with them, and that's what would have been expected of them too. And you're glad that God gave them the courage that they were able to stay with their people.
I was just doing my duty. I was a soldier, and that's it. Was paid for it. Politics and that wasn't entering my head or anything like that.
Joe Lavery came home to a loving family, but it was difficult for his peers to understand what he had been through as a prisoner of war.
You wouldn't believe us, but people would say, what was it like? But they weren't interested. You listened for a while and you just stopped talking. You couldn't tell people what it was like, or they didn't want to know. You closed in yourself and stopped talking to people. I've talked more today than I've talked in 50 years.
Next time on War Stories, we hear about men like Harry O'Mara, who battled for the hills of Korea before coming home.